There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
7 o'clock here in the Central Time Zone. So hello there, everyday Americans. Welcome to the latest Constitution Study Live Q&A. That's right. I want you guys to bring the questions. I'll bring the answers. If you're joining me, if you're not on the Zoom call, you can just put your questions in the chat. It should show up on my screen, and I will answer them as they pop up. I do have several people in the Zoom room with me today. Yay, this is a great way because I like having the Q&A. I usually try to start off with some thought or topic, and my topic today is COVID extortion. I can think of no better term for what has been going on lately than COVID extortion. I actually looked up extort in Merriam-Webster Dictionary. I actually covered it in the radio program that I record to come out in a few days. But to extort is to obtain from a person by force, intimidation, or undue or illegal power. And well, there's an awful lot of that going around. I got hit with that. We had a doctor call us yesterday telling us that they're not going to, we're not going to accept us as a patient anymore because we won't take the experimental vaccine. At which point I said, well, you know what? I really don't want you as a doctor then anyway, because as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to push an experimental vaccine as a condition for showing up in your office, you're a quack. And, you know, I'm still debating whether or not I'm going to out the actual doctor or, you know, maybe just file an ethics complaint with the state medical board. I don't know. I haven't figured that part out yet. But there are so many examples of, and there's no other term for it, extortion. You know, you will comply or else. Now, I haven't seen it. Biden today was supposed to announce a new 6-part plan to try and get everybody vaccinated. Too bad. You know, I'm sorry. I will not comply anymore. I am done playing the good little subject. I am a free citizen. I have rights. And anybody that tries to come at you with one of them needles is an imminent threat and will be dealt with appropriately. I'm standing my ground. I will not initiate violence, but if you initiate contact with me, expect a violent response. That's, you know, and there are some people that are pushing back. Mostly what I hear is there's a few places that are pushing back in the court system, which is one possibility. But remember, courts are government, which means you're still petitioning the government. And just because a court says so doesn't mean it's legal, doesn't mean it's true. It just means that in the opinion of these judges, you know, that's what they say. I'm sorry, the Constitution supersedes the opinion of a judge. It supersedes the actions of the president. It supersedes every other law in this country. And it's now time for the American people to simply, hey, the Constitution is my authority to say no. My answer is no. You want proof? Here you go. Here's the knowing your rights. Ooh, it doesn't even show up on the screen. Well, that's kind of odd. It's the placard I use, and it shows right here, hey, you're going to deprive me of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That is a federal crime. And you know what? It's time we stop playing games. I just heard Nashville wants to put in a mask mandate. I don't have cause to go to Nashville very often, but no more. If you are going to be a petty tyrant, or if you're going to be associated with, if you're going to be complicit with, if you're going to be aid and abet tyrants, I don't want to do business with you anymore. Last several years, there's been a large homeschool conference in Nashville that I've been a part of, and I'm contacting them going, if you're making me wear a mask, I ain't showing up. Period, end story. If you're making me get a vaccine or wear a mask, I ain't showing up. Which is sad. I meet a lot of great people there. I have a great time talking with people, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to aid and abet extortion anymore. And I think it's about time the American people start asking themselves, how far will you fall before you'll stand up and stop being a subject and start being a free citizen with human rights, not a subject of petty tyrants in government. So that's kind of my rant. It looks like Periscope is not cooperating today. I haven't seen anybody on YouTube yet, but so let's open the floor up for questions. That's what we're here for, questions and answers. So who's got my first question today? Go for it. You don't have to be shy, Andy. Come on.
I don't want to take the floor before anyone else. I want to, leave it open. But I guess I had an I taught moment, actually. I just had page 19. So we've talked a lot about masks, but something that I didn't think about before, because kids are now going back to school. Mm-hmm. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. If a mask harms a child, is that not cruel and unusual punishment to force them to wear one?
Well, that comes from, I believe, the cruel and unusual punishment, what, 8th Amendment? And it's a question of a punishment for a crime. This way precedes that. All right. This is a deprivation of liberty and property without due process of law. If it's done by the state, if it's done by the feds, it's a 5th Amendment violation. If it's done by the state, it's both a 5th and a 14th Amendment violation. Therefore, it makes it a federal crime. Title 18 USC Section 242. These are criminal acts. And here's the real sad part. I got hit with another one today. They're saying, well, it's not the Pfizer vaccine's been approved. No, it is not. So that's why I say you got to go to the original sources. The Pfizer vaccine has not been approved. And I double checked. I actually talked to I had a doctor's appointment earlier this week, and I wanted her to explain this to me. So I understand it. The Pfizer and BioNTech got together. Now, the Pfizer vaccine had their emergency use authorization extended, and the BioNTech, which I understand is a delivery system, it's how the vaccine actually gets delivered, not the shot, but it's the stuff that they put it in, the media they put it in to actually give you the shot. That has been given conditional approval pending further testing. So no, it has not been fully, it hasn't gone through all of its clinical trials. It is still an experiment. And I was listening to this one guy, and, he's like, well, we have, he was comparing it to, rubella and mumps. And first of all, I don't care. If you're telling me that I must get a vaccine without due process, right, then you got a problem. Now, the funny thing about vaccines, they say, well, it's to protect the other kids. No, it's not. The purpose of vaccines is not to protect other kids, to protect you. But you're comparing a vaccine with decades of history, decades of data about its effectiveness and its risks to an experimental drug that's been out less than a year and has not gone through full testing. That's not even close. That's one of those, better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and prove it. The very idea that you compare an experimental vaccine with a proven tested vaccine means you're not worth listening to. I'm sorry. You've proven yourself to be a buffoon and not worth listening to. The same thing with, again, this doctor that I dealt with, his PA was surprised when she found out that, yes, this, according to the CDC, I have a 99.5% chance of surviving COVID by actually looking at the data. That, fine. That's why, I was already not real thrilled with that doctor. But we're seeing it in, it's airlines, it's businesses, it's employers. And we have to decide at what point we're going to say no. Stand our ground. No, this is not allowed anymore. I am a free citizen, and if you want to treat me like a child, like a petty subject, I will not comply. And if that means we don't do business anymore, that means we don't do business anymore. If that means that I have to drive somewhere rather than fly somewhere, so be it. But we have no idea what the long-term impact of this slavish devotion to bureaucrats with medical degrees is going to cost us. There's already been, what are the latest numbers? Almost 16,000 people have died after taking the vaccine, according to the CDC's own numbers. Now they're pushing it on small children, I saw another report. They did a study of 200 and some odd hospitals, and they found of the children under 18 that were hospitalized, less than 1% actually died from the disease. And granted, any death, especially a child's, they're tragic. But does that mean you get to destroy the lives of the entire country because a handful of children? How about we spend some time actually working on ways to prevent the children in the hospital from dying, rather than spending all this time and money trying to get people to take a vaccine they don't want because you can't prove it's effective. So to me, punishment, the punishment is the nonsense. Where is it? Was it New York or California? It was New York City. If a business is found to not check people for a COVID vaccine before allowing them in, a restaurant, it's like a $10,000 fine. That is an excessive fine. Requiring inmates to take an experimental drug before being put into prison, that is an excessive punishment. But way before that, we have this whole nonsense. And this is the point where I think the American people have to stand up and grow a spine. So who's next? Well, I'm figuring YouTube has probably suppressed me, because at this point, nobody has shown up on the YouTube.
I got a question.
So, yeah, go ahead, Tunnel Lord.
Yeah, hold on. I gotta find it first.
Nobody
So
has shown up on.
I ran into this sort of situation where I ran across a person saying in Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2, it gave the judiciary the ability to make law, and their logic was, I'll read it. Clause 2, Section 2 of Article 3. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and councils, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction, period. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions under such regulations as the Congress shall make. And their reasoning was that, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction both as to law and fact was their excuse, or their reasoning for the judiciary to be able to make law. And I'm like, well, no, that's not at all what it means. I looked into it. I'm like, oh, it just means I think that they can preside over cases having to do with those two things.
Well, it comes down to the judgment. So let me see. Let me go back, because I remember where I saw this. I saw this back in my good friend Noah Webster's dictionary. And it's understanding that when a case comes before before a court, right, or before a jury as well, there are two parts to be considered. There are the facts of the case. In other words, do the facts support a violation of the law? And then there's the law of the case. Does the law stand? We would say, is it constitutional? Is it supported by law? So when they talk about when it talks about having appellate jurisdiction to both the law and the facts of a case, I'm looking here. Is that case for the Supreme Court shall have jurisdiction both as to the law and the fact. That means the Supreme Court can review both the law and the facts in the case. Not that they can make the law, but that they can look at the legitimacy of the law. The Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1 says all legislative, all lawmaking power is vested in Congress. Period.
Yeah, I said,
no
I said
granted,
the same thing.
Yeah, there's no authority granted. What we have, and it's referred to often as common law, but the problem is they are placing common law or the opinion of judges above not only the statutory law, but the Constitution, which is a complete inversion of what Chief Justice Marshall talked about in the Marbury versus Madison case. See, everybody points. I heard someone refer today. There's a program I listened to called Legal Docket from the World News Group, and they repeated, hey, the Chief Justice Marshall and the power of the court to establish precedent. No, the court literally said, listen, yes, Mr. Marbury was aggrieved. He had a right to the commission to his, I think it was a justice of the peace office, right? But the court did not have the legal authority to issue what's called a writ of mandamus and order to the executive branch to make that happen. The legislation that Congress passed, supposedly giving that power to the court, did not pass constitutional muster, meaning the Supreme Court looked at the law and said, yep, the law says we can do this, but that law is not valid. It is void because it's contrary to the Constitution. Therefore, we must place the Constitution above what Congress did. So no, the Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2 does not give the Supreme Court the authority to make law. It says it has the authority to review the law in any cases that are brought before, in any cases where it is the appellate court, the court of review. Right? Notice, because even that is subject to the restrictions of Congress, right? Because Congress can regulate which cases and which laws the Supreme Court can review. It says so right there. So no, this is one of those cases of I see a word and I'm going to twist the meanings to get an answer that I want, not an actual review of what the Constitution actually says. So you are right. This person was wrong, and there's the proof and evidence of it.
Well, yeah, I came to the same conclusion. I just thought I would just bring it to you just to, I guess, double check more than anything. And then there's another question I had. So out here in Idaho, the Supreme Court has, I'll just read it. The Supreme Court shall also have original jurisdiction to issue writs of mandamus, certiorari, excuse me.
Certiorari.
Prohibition and habeas corpus, and all writs necessary or proper to the complete exercise of its appellate jurisdiction. I was kind of curious to what writs of mandamus and
So a writ of mandamus, and this is the Idaho Constitution dealing with the Idaho Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court of the United States. So a writ of mandamus is a court order to an inferior body. If you go to,
well, does that body, is it just judiciary or is that all bodies?
Well, that's the interesting part. See, now that's from the Constitution of the state of Idaho.
Yeah.
So in effect, the state of Idaho has said that they can issue writs of mandamus, but do they say who they can issue writs of mandamus to? See, that's the important part. And that's I'd have to do some more research, because if they gave them a general power of a writ of mandamus, that basically would put the Supreme Court of Idaho above the other two branches of government, because it would allow them to issue orders to the governor and to the legislature based on their opinion. And that's a dangerous place to be. Now, in general, a writ of mandamus is issued to an inferior body, which means the Idaho Supreme Court could issue a writ of mandamus to a lower court within the state of Idaho. That would make sense, but it's really a question of if you want I haven't, like I said, I haven't studied that much of the Idaho Constitution, but I think what they're dealing with is in the context when you're issuing a writ of mandamus, who are they allowed to issue a writ of mandamus to? Because that would truly invert the power structure of the three branches that was established with the U.S. Constitution, where the judiciary is actually dependent on the executive branch to take action on its orders. All right, any opinion it issues, it has no power. There's no executive function within the judiciary. They're dependent on the executive branch to do that. This would allow in Idaho, this would allow the court to actually order the governor to enforce a court order, which would put him which may require him to do something in violation of the Constitution of either Idaho or the United States. So that's an interesting twist.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to also do a little more research on it because there was a case pertaining to what something going on here, and I was like, because what happened is that the court ordered the legislature to they essentially knock down a law or something, and I'm like, well, they can't do that, You typically, at least the U.S., the United States, the federal government can't do that. The Supreme Court can't do that. So I was assuming, okay, they got this blatantly wrong. Let's go find out. And I find this here. So I'm like, that's why I came in and brought it to you. So it's just to see.
Yeah, that's what we got to find a little more context, because if I take it's one of those things we may need to study that a bit more to see, because if that's the case, then Idaho has basically broken checks and balances, because there is now no check on the judiciary. There's no check on the Supreme Court, because if the Supreme Court can order somebody to follow its wishes, has the legal authority to order another branch of government to follow its wishes, then there's no check on that branch. And that is a dangerous situation. Now, it could also be people didn't think about it. I've seen a lot of stuff where it was written and they never figured people would be as stupid as they are in the 21st century, but that's that's just the way it is.
I got to do more research. All right. Well, that's my questions.
Yep. So, hey, it looks like somebody finally joined on YouTube. Hello there, YouTube. If you have a question out there on YouTube, put it in the comments. I will do my best to answer it here on the program. While I'm waiting, anybody else have a question for me?
Okay, I do.
Okay, Jan.
I sent you that Declaration of People of the United States for Global Peace and Prosperity, and I compared it with our Declaration of Independence. And my question, I guess, would be, what teeth, other than to separate us from the ruling country, does a declaration have?
Well, remember what the Declaration of Independence is, right? It is the public announcement of the justification for the colonies to say, no, we are states, and therefore we are breaking our political ties with Great Britain. Now, what I found interesting is, they basically, I perused it quickly last night. They basically took the Declaration of Independence and tried to apply it to today. I did something very similar back on the 4th of July, where I just called what I called,
which I liked better.
Yeah, the Redeclaration of Independence, because it seemed to me in the verbosity of it that I don't know if it was just their style or if there was something else going on, but where the original declaration simply said that he, being the king, had refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. They go on and say, well, they don't define who they is, with the assent or refuse assent by corruption of the truth of which is evident by the U.S. 2020. They go into these detailed elections that it's like, I think they've missed the point. I'm not saying what they're saying is wrong, but I'm saying is rather than taking this is when I wrote the Declaration of Independence, I specifically went through the Declaration of Independence. How do we apply that to the 21st century? What is our justification to the world that it is right and proper for the American people to alter the government in Washington? And that's what I did. This seems to be a lot more of a political statement than it is a Constitution and rights and justice statement. Now, again, I only perused it very quickly. I don't know what their agenda is, but that's why I pointed you to that. Said, look at the one that I did back on the 4th of July, because I tried to keep as much of the original language as possible because I wanted to make the point. Everything we complained about with King George and Parliament, you can now complain about either as some branch of the government in Washington, D.C. And that's a very simple statement. So I don't know where you got this from, but yeah, it looks like much more of a political statement than it is a constitutional one.
And I don't disagree. It was given to me by my CEO. So we ran with it just to ask the questions and tell people to look into it. But then went back and reviewed your redeclaration that you posted this year. And, actually, if I was going to get behind one, I would get behind yours. But the fact that you already did it didn't change anything in our country. And I'm wondering, a declaration like that, how do people either get behind it? What do we do with it? How do we make it have teeth? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how that works.
So the main difference between the 1776 declaration and my redeclaration is in 1776, the Continental Congress had passed the Lee Resolution. They'd adopted the first part of the Lee Resolution. They had declared themselves free and independent states. And this was their public pronouncement of it. In fact, we read, if I bring it up here, where are we here? When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. So they've already declared themselves free and independent states. And they're saying what we need to do now is we need to show the rightness of our cause. Right? We need to show that we aren't just a bunch of spoiled brat children that are throwing a temper tantrum. There are reasons. The actual British law was being violated by the king, therefore their cause was right and just. Now, where I find it, if I can type. When I wrote my redeclaration, obviously the American people, there's no government in America that has simply said we're breaking our ties with Washington, right? That hasn't happened, right? So the purpose of the redeclaration really is to get people to consider just how much Washington, D.C. is acting like King today is acting like King George did. So as I wrote in the article, as we celebrate the anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, I think it's important that we take some time and perform a self-examination of the independence to which those men pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sake, and honor. If we compare the federal government today to the king we declared independence from, I think we'll find them much more alike than we would find comfortable. And that's where the rest of it goes through. So that's that's why in my declaration I said, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to regain control of their government and to assume among the powers he has a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to this action. So my re-declaration is meant to do two things. One is to show people, you realize in 1776, we fought a war over this, and we are just as bad, as not worse today as we were back then. The other is to say, so when I say we need to regain control of our government, that, we, the people, establish government, that governments are created among men to protect our rights, that they get their just powers from our consent. This is our declaration, which is why when I was talking you didn't make it, I was talking at the opening about the need for the American people to stand against the extortion, the COVID extortion that's going on today, to recognize that the Constitution is our legal authority to say no, and actually stand and say, no, I will not. I do not accept that. That is void. That is a violation of the Constitution. No, it won't go. And this was meant to show us it's a proof that when people are standing against, when people assembled in DC to protest the malfeasance and illegality in the election of 2020, they were referred to as insurrectionists. Right? They're not insurrectionists. They are trying to reestablish the legal authority of the Constitution of the United States. We need to understand that when someone simply calls you an insurrectionist, you can say, no, look at, you violated this. You're denying the very things we fought for. That is our justification to the world to say, no, it is right for the American people to stand up and say, we need to, how did Abraham Lincoln put it? The people are the rightful masters of Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence is meant as a tool to justify overthrowing the men and women who are perverting the Constitution of the United States. It's not, that is one of the main differences between the original document in 1776 and what I did, which was really meant to be an eye opener and to get people to engage and say, yeah, you're right. Hey, wait a second. The courts are denying or denying their assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary to public good. The federal government has forbidden the states to pass laws of pressing importance till they should get their assent. The federal government has refused to pass laws for the accommodation of territories held in trust for the people, requiring that the people of the new states relinquish the right of control over public territories. All of these are meant to say, look, this is our justification for it. So that's the way we get behind it is it's a teaching tool to show so when we say that the government in Washington, D.C. is out of control and people just roll their eyes, here's our justification. Here's our declaration to a watching world to say, no, there's reason for this, and here it is. So hopefully that makes sense. Where'd you go?
It makes a ton of sense. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. No questions from YouTube yet. So who else has got a question for me? Is it going to be a quiet night? Is that smoke I smell, Tunnel Lord, trying to come up with a question?
Yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. There's fires out here. Yeah, you're probably smelling smoke.
So actually, let me tell you a couple things are going on. I've been in contact with a lady in Tampa Bay, Florida, and we are trying to put together an event there. They've taken my advice. They will actually want to meet with the sheriff. They want me to go meet with their sheriff. They want me to engage, and while I'm there, I want to put on a couple of events. So I am trying to get down to Florida, hopefully in November. It's a little slow getting everything put together, but we're working on it. I know, Tunnel Lord, you invited me up to northern Idaho, which I couldn't make in this last trip, but come springtime, maybe, northern Idaho, western Washington and Oregon might be an interesting tour to, place to run around and meet with some people. I know there's a lot of, I've talked occasionally about the Greater Idaho movement, the counties in both Washington State and Oregon that want to leave their state and join Idaho. That's been interesting. I did have somebody reach out about going down to Houston, but I replied back and I haven't heard from them. So I am still trying to put on more events over the next year or so, more knowing your rights events, more educational events, partially because I have a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun up in North Dakota and Wyoming. I got to meet a lot of great people. It helps sell some books, which helps pay for all this stuff, which is always a good thing. But I wanted it. So if you are interested or someone that might be interested, let me know. I still want to find an excuse to get back to the Northeast, see some old friends and family I haven't seen for a while. We need to start putting some of those together. Obviously, the northern ones, I want to wait until after the winter and the weather turns better. But the southern ones I can do in the wintertime while it's still pretty cool. So that's still in the mix.
Yeah, I'm working on networking right now. There's 2 events happening tomorrow and on Saturday that I'm gonna try to network at.
Okay.
So
let's see what we can do. What was the other thing? Oh, the Constitution scholars. I am still trying to get the apprentices to gather together and talk about doing some more real-time work about actually, what are we doing? What are the apprentices doing to study? What are they doing to engage? How, right now I'm the only mentor. So how do we get mentoring going so that we can help grow them and help them not only grow in their understanding of the Constitution, but their ability to study and to teach others. So if you're interested in the apprentice program, I am still trying to do some of that stuff as well. And now that I've talked for a little while, did I give people a chance to come up with a good question?
Well, I guess it's not my question with the Constitution, but like how is it? How do you work in, I guess, evangelizing to people about the supremacy of the Constitution and conversation or whatnot? Like the average people,
Usually what I do is I try to find a way to show them their ignorance without insulting them. It usually, you talk about evangelizing. In many ways, it's the same way. It's opening them up to questions. So, for example, it's one of the reasons why I like the Q&A, right? Because someone comes with a question, and then can we open them up in their thought processes about, well, have you thought about this? I had one the other day. What was it? Well, let's take a perfect example, right? You tell Lord, you're talking about the gentleman who believes that the Supreme Court has the ability to make law. That's the opportunity to one, explain, wait a second, that's not what the Constitution actually says. More often than not, most people come with, for lack of a better term, a meme, something they've heard, an idea they've been told. and actually show them that's not the case. One of the classes I teach is called 3 Myths About the Constitution. And I take 3 commonly held myths. Most of us are taught this in school. Most of us have heard this repeated over and over and over again. And by exposing the errors in that, you expose the importance of understanding the Constitution. So the 3 myths, by the way, are that we have 3 co-equal branches of government. We have 3, but they're not equal. That federal judges serve lifetime appointments. They do not. They serve during their good behavior. And what's the third one? I haven't done it in a while, so I'm trying to. That the people don't elect the president of the United States. And those types of questions, those type of breaking those assumptions and saying, no, this is just not my words. This is what the Constitution says. That generally works fairly well in groups. In individuals, when you're talking more one-on-one, it's when you can challenge an assumption with facts. The best example I have was shortly after the 2020 election, I was on a conference call with a few people about one of the states that had problems, constitutional issues in their election. And in the discussion, one of the people there was a constitutional lawyer who had spent 10 years focusing on the Electoral College. Fine. We were talking about, well, what happens if we can get the state legislature to not certify the electors because they were appointed in a method other than the one created by the legislature, therefore was done in violation of the Constitution. They said, well, then this person said, well, that would throw the presidential election to the House of Representatives. I go, not necessarily, because if this state has 20 electors, I think it actually had 20 electors. If this state has 20 electors, then the number of electors needed to become president is not 270, it's 260. She goes, no, it's 270. It's the total number of electors. I says, no. And I quoted the Constitution that it's the number of electors appointed. If a state does not appoint electors, it's the majority. If they get a majority of the electors appointed, if they don't appoint electors, the number that is that majority drops. And again, this person's been 10 years focusing on the Electoral College. And I showed them something new. And that is the trick, is when it's that in-top moment. It's that wait a second, there's something new here. That is generally on a one-on-one basis, what makes it, what gets people to consider something different. It's what opens the mind up to a new possibility. And then what I've used lately is the reason it's important to study the Constitution, the actual Constitution of the United States, not what people say about it, but the actual document, is the same reason when my wife was a bank teller, they never trained her on counterfeit money. When they were teaching her to handle money, she was never allowed to touch counterfeit money. She was only allowed to touch real currency. So that she became so familiar with its look, its feel, its smell, that if you handed her a counterfeit bill, even if she wasn't sure what was wrong, she knew something was wrong. And that was a red flag to have this checked out. And that's why we study the Constitution, so that we're so familiar with what it actually says. When someone says something that doesn't seem right, even if we're not exactly sure why, it piques our interest and sends us back to the original document to find the truth. I analyze it to the Bereans in the book of Acts, chapter 17. Paul and Timothy, I think, were kicked out of Thessalonica. They go to this town called Berea. And in verse 11, it says, the Bereans were more noble than those in Thessalonica because they listened to what was said and went back to scripture every day to see if it was so. That's kind of the same mentality of, I'll listen to what you have to say, but I'm going to go back to the original document to see if it's so. And part of that study means when someone says something that doesn't settle right, you find that very frequently you're right. You just have to go back to the document to figure out where and what is actually wrong. That's why I encourage, it's one of the reasons why I encourage studying what the document actually says, the original document, not simply books that people write about it. Now I wrote a book about it, and I think we should, listen to what other people have to say, but it always has to go back to what does the original document say, not what does somebody with alphabet soup after their name say the document says, because this dependency on experts has become detrimental to even the concept of rational thought in America. So does that make sense, Lord? It's showing people the understanding, I guess. It's that idea of people seeing in you this light of liberty and freedom and understanding rights, and they go, "Hey, where did you get that?" To make another biblical analogy.
Yeah, well, I was kind of already doing that to like a degree. I was just seeing what else you would do just to add on, because I think the biggest thing right now is networking. I need to get working on in my county and across the state.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I'm working on is the same thing. It's getting exposure. It's getting people to see and listen to this idea that, yeah, we can all study the Constitution and we'll all be better off when we do. And this idea that we are citizens, not subjects. So very much along the same line. Anyone else? I don't, my YouTube viewers, Tunnel Lord, is that you on YouTube?
No.
So I do actually have a YouTuber on there. Hey, YouTuber, I'd love to answer your question. Just type it in the comment. I'll see it and we'll answer it. Meanwhile, what do we got for my Zoomers?
Zoomers. Wow.
Christopher's been quiet so far.
I think we all know what's coming. That they're gonna try to do forced vaccines. They've been doing inch by inch. That's on the table, I guess.
Yes, forced vac. They're going to intimidate as much as they can people to get the vaccine, and that is extremely dangerous. Partially because of the freedom and liberty issue, partially from a medical standpoint. Lord knows, I'm old enough to remember the thalidomide. They said, hey, we have this great drug. We give it to the pregnant women. It makes them feel so much better. And they had all the birth defects. And we haven't learned. We just haven't learned. We're doing the same thing over and over again. I have serious concerns of what the long-term effects of the vaccines are going to be, both medically and societally, when there are so many people. You've got governments, you've got businesses, and you've got individuals all lining up to persuade you to get the vaccine. And so much of it is based on, there's so much call by politicians and pundits to get rid of misinformation, when it's them that are putting out so much of the misinformation. I was talking to someone the other day about the vaccine, and the funny part was, it's like, well, same things, right? No, the vaccine has not been approved. It's still an emergency use authorization. No, the vaccine doesn't stop you from getting COVID. It helps you. It helps your body defend against it. No, it doesn't stop you from spreading COVID, because studies show the viral load of people who've been vaccinated is just as high as people who have not been vaccinated. Yes, it does help so that you're less likely to be in the hospital. This is true, but that's not the same. They're not pushing it as to save you. They're pushing it to save others. And the person starts, well, then we all need to go back to wearing masks, except masks don't work. There are numerous studies show that masks, the cloth masks are the virus is what, 0.1 microns, and the cloth masks are like 3 and 4 microns, and even even an N95 is only 0.3 microns. It's still 3 times larger than the virus. So a properly fitting N95 mask has limited, it's the most effective, but it's limited effect. And that's not what they're dealing with. But they've heard these from these quote unquote experts, and they never go back to check the details. They simply, it was a P.T. Barnum that said there's a sucker born every minute. Yeah, we are. And they're using, and the sad part is the number that will not accept actual facts and data. An expert said so, therefore you're not an expert, you cannot be right. Even if I'm getting data from actual experts, actual tests. No, we've lost that. And my fear is that the American society has been so polluted with this worship of experts that as a whole, the American people no longer have the ability to critically assess information. It's literally between the education system and society as a whole, it has been drummed out of our heads, the ability to look at something critically and make a decision for ourselves. So. Now, Christopher popped something in. Let's say a police arrest you or fine you for not following COVID mandate. You tried to call the sheriff to arrest the officer for committing a federal crime or depriving your rights, but the sheriff turns out to be corrupt and let your rights to be deprived. What should the person do to stand up to petty tyrants? This is an example I couldn't voice it because I'll end up saying something different from what my mind says. Okay, well, sometimes we think best in the written word rather than the spoken word. And, Christopher has a good point. Just because you're right doesn't mean you won't be arrested. It is the reason why I've said so often, we must focus locally. We must make sure that our sheriffs both know their constitutional duty and are willing to enforce their constitutional duty, their oath of office. Because if we don't, you have no protection at home. And what can you do? Well, at that point, there's 2 things you can do. One is you can simply refuse to comply. Arrest me if you want, but I refuse to comply. I'm gonna call the FBI. I'm gonna call the sheriff. I'm gonna make as big a stink as possible. But understand that doesn't mean that everybody understands what their actual oath means. As I've said, as a whole, society has, we've been brainwashed into thinking that because someone with a government paycheck said so, that makes it law, that makes it right, that makes it just. Somehow legal means moral. And even something that is supposedly legal isn't necessarily legal. It's why I put the knowing your rights thing together, so you could have at least a piece of paper to show the officer, wait a second, you're depriving me of my rights without, you're depriving me of my life and liberty without due process of law. The Supreme Court of the United States said that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void. This law deprives me of my life and liberty without my liberty and my property without due process of law. It's void. You're enforcing a void law. Now, are you going to convince everybody? No. The question is, how far will you go? And that's a decision everybody has to make. The vast majority of Americans will not risk going to jail to protect their rights. It's a simple fact. I do not see the vast majority of the American people willing to take a stand to the point of being arrested to protect their rights. You have a hard enough time getting a majority of Americans even to show up to vote. You really think they're going to stand up and risk jail time. But that's why it's so important that those who are willing to stand up and risk jail time need to be supported by the others, by the other Americans who are liberty-minded, but not willing to go that far. You know, it's the 3% statistic, right? Only, 30% of the colonists supported independence, but only 3% actually fought. But there was enough support. The 30% were willing to support those who fought. They were willing to provide food and ammunition and shelter and intelligence. They were willing to help. They just weren't willing to go that far and actually fight. We need to find those who are willing to go that far and risk jail time. And then the rest, those who are not willing to go that far, need to support those who are. That may be supporting them in person. It may be supporting them financially. It may be helping to take care of their family while they're in jail or fighting this. The world is not fair. Just because you're right doesn't mean you get off scot-free. But we have to ask, what are our rights worth and what are our children's rights worth? And if you get, if they get arrested, you keep fighting, you keep pushing, because I go back, we get this impression that, if you're arrested, you're done for, right? The courts are out to get you. But I'm reminded a comment I had before I got kicked off of Facebook. A lady contacted me and said that her husband had actually sued some county officials, and he won the case. And the judge told him that the reason he won is he knew the Constitution of both his state and his country and was able to articulate those positions in court. So I think it's just as important that we be prepared to articulate in our own defense as well as in the defense of others. An example here, Middle Tennessee State University had law enforcement take a student off campus because she refused to get a COVID vaccine. She showed up on campus and the court, the school literally had 2 law enforcement officers there to greet her and escort her off. Now, I have tried to get in touch with her and the lawyer. I even found the lawsuit that was filed. I tried to find the lawyer at the law firm to contact them saying, do you want to come on the radio program? Do you want to look at some of the research I've done from a constitutional standpoint? Because most likely you were not taught this in law school. I'm willing to provide information to help them because I want them to be able to articulate. Because will it work with every judge? No. But we have to put, regardless of the outcome, we have to fight the good fight. We have to do the right thing because it's the right thing, not simply because we know we're going to get away with it. This isn't a Marvel movie. The heroes don't always win in the end. But you have to ask yourself, what will you say to your children if you did nothing, if you sat back and did nothing while their rights were destroyed?
This is kind of it's that what Chris brought up. It's one of those things where you kind of have to pick your fights a little bit as well. You have to scout out your county, you have to see who's in the positions, and you have to see what they're like before you try to do something like that. Because you're gonna probably run into some problems. Another thing is, I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, kind of have to scout a little bit. Maybe, yeah.
Well, yeah, you're right. That you have to pick your battles. Like I said, everyone has to decide for themselves which hill they're willing to die on. That's a personal decision that we all have to make. But you're also right and the example I use, I made this analogy. I started doing it on the tour. Washington, D.C. and our state houses, They're the battle lines. They're the front line of battle. Your home, your county, that's your supply depot. And I think I read it in a Tom Clancy novel. Amateurs talk tactics, experts talk logistics. If how can you fight in DC in your state house if you're not secure at home? It's why we have to secure our home counties so that if nothing else, we can fight being reasonably sure that our supply lines, our depots are protected. Because if you're, if you take the example of, that Chris brought up and saying, hey, your Home Depot, your supply line is not secure. It can be attacked by the enemy. What are you going to do? You're cut off. Think of, I remember watching the Band of Brothers, and there was a line as they were going into what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. They said, hey, you go in there, you're going to be surrounded. And they said, we're airborne. We're supposed to be surrounded. Well, that's a difficult position to be in, right? Where's your supplies coming from? Where's the food? Where's the ammo? Where's the medicine? It's much better to have supply depots that are secure that says, yes, I'm fighting here, but I know I can get the ammunition. I know I can get the food. I know I can get the medical care. I know that if I'm injured, I have some place to go back to recuperate while other people are fighting. That's why it's so important that we protect, that we regain control of our counties. And yes, the sheriff is probably our first step, but to make sure that when push comes to shove, your sheriff has your back. And like I said, in my county, my sheriff has talked a good game. So far, I've been blessed that he hasn't had to show it yet. He hasn't actually, I've yet to have to call him up to have some bureaucratic weenie dragged from my property because they wouldn't leave. They were trespassing and wouldn't leave. I have yet to be molested in a store for not wearing a mask. But then again, I try to avoid the type of enclaves that do that. I don't spend time in Nashville, which is, by the way, for those of you who don't know, Nashville is an extremely blue city and an extremely red state. I don't hang out in socialist meccas like that. I like being in a rural county where people are sane and the thought of rights means something. But it's also important that, Chris brought up a good point. We need to prepare ahead of time. You need to think. There's a saying in training: your body won't go where your mind hasn't been. And if you haven't considered what would you do in this type of situation, you're caught flat-footed. It's when you stop and consider, what will I do when something like this happens, that you are prepared to react. It's a basic part of training, and it's something we all need to consider. So, any more questions? It's kind of a light night tonight. I was hoping to have a little more interest. I've been talking about this off and on the radio program, so I was hoping to get some more people on YouTube. No more questions? Are we going to be done early, or you got something else? Come on. How about some other thing you'd like me to chat about? What's new? What's going on in your people's neck of the woods?
Well, I guess my governor has been doing essentially the same thing Biden's been doing. He's been making subtle threats, kind of thing. His most recent thing was like, oh, Idahoan kids won't be able to go to school or something or whatnot. And he dumped like $5 million into testing at schools or whatever, which is illegal. He doesn't have that power he wasn't given that power in the Constitution. So it's completely illegal. That's the thing. There's like 10 legislatures and like a few senators who recognize that, but there's nothing they can really do because the voters haven't voted in good judges, judges who are constitutionally educated correctly. That's kind of an issue. I mean, this governor, in fact, he should have been impeached already for what he did. He told everyone to stay home for 21 days. He should have been impeached, but he wasn't because people's ignorance. I think that's the biggest thing. Because right now, what I'm working on is trying to make people aware of what's going on within the state, who are just making them aware of, I guess, rhinos. The typical, people who say the typical phrases of like guns, babies, and taxes. But when it comes to liberty, they don't move their feet or do diddly squat. I'm trying to make them aware of that, and also make them aware of who to actually vote for, how to actually vote. Vote for someone who upholds the Constitution, the supremacy of the Constitution. Including the some education about that in there as well, because we're in this situation here in Idaho because the populace don't vote locally for diddly squat, and they're horribly ignorant about their rights. Not like to the point where they're like, oh, I'm a subject, but they have a sense of what their rights are, but they cannot completely defend them and assert them effectively.
Understand, there is no such thing as a rhino. A rhino is a name that people who don't like what the Republican Party is doing assign to them rather than saying a pox on your house. Understand, the purpose of the Republican Party is to have power in the Republican Party. Period. End of story. That is its sole purpose for existing. It is not to embrace constitutionality. It's not even to affect their platform. It is to get Republicans elected so they can wield power. And when they wield power, they're often little different than the Democrats. Now, I don't know about Idaho, but I remember we had years of Republicans saying, get rid of Obamacare, get rid of Obamacare, get rid of Obamacare. And as soon, and so we gave them, they got the majority in the House. Oh, we need the Senate. So they won the Senate. Oh, we need the president. So they won the president. And as soon as they had those three, they stopped promoting getting rid of Obamacare. They're cowards. They're worried about. They say what they think the people will vote for them want to hear. So, from my standpoint, there is no such thing as a rhino. A rhino is simply a name that one Republican calls another Republican that doesn't like the way they do business. Republicans are not interested in as a rule, the Republican Party is not interested in the Constitution of the United States. It's not interested in the Constitution of the states. It is interested in its own power, period. Now, you talk about people not being subjects. Very much they are, but you're right. They don't, it's out of ignorance more than it is out of an active dislike for rights and liberty. It truly is ignorance. And I think the biggest thing that I've been talking about is understanding, and I believe that the Constitution of Idaho says this: all power is inherent in the people. That means when you form a government, that government works for the people. They are employees. Treat them as such. If you wouldn't hire that person to work in your business, why are you hiring them to exercise your power in government? So, I have this pet peeve that, oh, the Republicans will save us. No, the Republicans will abandon us as soon as it is convenient for them to do so, because they always have. But when it comes to educating the people, maybe your best bet is to find that line and again, I'm not sure it's in the Idaho Constitution. I know it's in most of the state constitutions, but find the line that says all power is inherent in the people and remind them of that. The power is theirs. The person you vote for is your employee. How are you vetting your employee? Is this employee stealing you, robbing from you blind? You know, are they cheating in their powers? Are they doing things you haven't told them they can do? Are they taking your money improperly? Hey, you're going to shut down the schools. How about I just stop paying school taxes? Just figure out what my tax bill is for the schools. I'll just stop paying it since you're not doing it. Oh, I can't do that? Says who? If you're not going to run schools, we're not going to pay taxes for schools. That was the deal. You collect taxes for schools, you run the schools. And, you know, start this idea of, you know, treat them like employees. Stop genuflecting for them. Stop using honorifics. You know, there's the Constitution says there are no titles of nobility, but we in effect treat them like that. You know, you're the honorable representative. I'm sorry, if you act dishonorably, you're not the honorable anything. Refuse to use their honorifics. Simply start learning to treat them as employees. Now, Andy had a good question. Thoughts about the Texas heartbeat bill. Well, boy, have I got good news for you. Monday, I've got a whole article and video coming out on the Texas heartbeat bill. Here's my 2 cents on the Texas heartbeat bill. First of all, Joe Biden, Attorney General, what's his name? Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, idiots and buffoons. Joe Biden said that the Supreme Court created a constitutional right to abortion. The Supreme Court did no such thing. Not only is the Supreme Court not legally allowed to create a constitutionally protected right, if you read the Roe v. Wade opinion, they didn't create a right to an abortion. They didn't. It's not in there. What they said was that a law criminalizing abortion except to save the life of the mother violated the 14th Amendment's due process clause. Now, here's the Texas heartbeat bill. There are a lot of people refer to it as a 6-week bill. The Texas heartbeat bill has three really important things. First, before a doctor can perform abortion, they must use standard medical practices to detect a heartbeat. If a heartbeat is present, they cannot perform an abortion unless there is a medical emergency, right? That's what the law, I actually read the law. They have to attempt to detect a heartbeat. If a heartbeat is detected, they cannot perform an abortion unless it's in the opinion of the doctor is a medical emergency. Number 2, to get around the Roe v. Wade opinion, I believe that's why they did it. The Texas heartbeat law is a civil offense, not a criminal one. Meaning, you don't go to jail for performing an abortion. And by the way, the mother is not implicated, but anyone who performs or facilitates an abortion can be sued by anyone except a government official or employee, which is really the interesting part of it. Because, okay, it's a civil matter, but they've made it so broad. I think that's where they're going to have issues, because the way I read the law, me as a Tennessee citizen can sue a doctor or members in a clinic in Texas for performing an abortion without checking for a heartbeat, simply because I want to. I find it morally offensive. I don't have to be involved in any way, shape, or form. As long as I'm not a government employee or officer of the state of Texas, technically anyone can sue. And I think that's where they're going to run into problems. Now, all this hoopla about the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade. All the Supreme Court did was look at this. They were asked to, the district court was asked to stay the law, stay the enforcement of the law. They did not. The circuit court, I'm sorry, I think the district court did. The circuit court overruled that. And the Supreme Court said, we cannot, because by precedent, we don't enjoin laws, we enjoin individuals who enforce the law. And the person that was accused, the defendant in the case, is actually, I believe, a judge, which means as an employee, as an officer of the state, that person cannot sue under this law. So how do you enjoin someone from doing something the law doesn't allow them to do? Now, another judge in Texas has enjoined a pro-life group from suing Planned Parenthood or one of the Planned Parenthood clinics, but that was a whole nother stuff. It really is kind of it's an interesting twist. I know that stuff about the parties. It's just easier to communicate with people. It's all the heartbeat law. And here's the thing. The heartbeat law is very simple, or I should say the heartbeat standard should be very simple. In Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court set the point at which states had an interest in what they refer to as the potentiality of human life as viability. The idea being when the child in the womb can survive outside the womb, then and only then does the state possibly have an interest in protecting what they refer to as the potentiality of life. Now, the Declaration of Independence says we are all endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This Roe court screwed up because, well, yes, in preventing someone from getting a procedure on their own body is a deprivation of liberty and property, right? Same thing with a vaccine and an abortion. The difference is, with an abortion, there are potentially 2 lives involved, which means once life is detected, the state, the government, has a duty to protect that life. That is its primary purpose, is to protect the rights of all the citizens. Once life is detected, then the state has the responsibility to protect life. How do you detect life? I have a pulse. He's alive. If someone finds me lying in the street, the first thing I do is, he's got a pulse. He's alive. Let's get medical care. No pulse. He's dead. Call the morgue, right? So the heartbeat aspect is, to me, the most interesting, because that is a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade. The rest of the law was really meant to get around Roe v. in my opinion, to get around Roe v. Wade.
I was kind of thinking the same thing. That there was so many fine details in that it felt very convoluted and just little tiny things. I almost feel it was more of a chess move than it was a blatant in your face, you're wrong thing. I don't know. I was just curious how you felt about that.
Oh, absolutely. It is, these, again, you're dealing with politicians. So in general, they're cowards. In general, they are more interested in protecting their own tuchuses than they are in doing the right thing. I think the legislators in Texas, they put it this way, they knew if it was a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade, they knew it would be stayed and there'd be years before anything had happened for it. This is an incremental move. It's the next increment, right? So we did we had states do pain, right? Once there's signs that the child can sense pain, you can't abort it. Then it was, Mississippi came up with 15 weeks because viability keeps moving forward. As medical science improve, viability keeps moving earlier and earlier in the pregnancy. So they said, let's make it 15 weeks. Texas went to the next step and said, nope, you detect a heartbeat, that's a life. That's any medical school tells you the first thing they teach you. Yep. Okay, there it is. So yeah, it's as usual, most of the propaganda that hit media and social media is based on hyperbole and misinformation. It's not based on fact. It's really based on what people have been told Roe v. Wade says, rather than the actual Roe v. Wade opinion, which is why I actually went back and read the opinion, the summary of the opinion for Roe v. Wade, and as to what the court actually said, because the whole nonsense of it's a constitutional the court created a constitutional right to abortion. Even the court didn't claim to do that. Even the court didn't claim to do that. But what was that? Don't ruin my story with facts. What are you gonna do? Okay, folks, we got 10 more minutes. It's time for probably one or two more questions if we got a couple good ones. I'm still looking. There's been nobody on YouTube. I think YouTube's been suppressing me anyway. I've been watching my numbers on my videos and they've been going down. They've been going up on Rumble though. A lot more people have been watching stuff on Rumble than they have on YouTube.
Okay, in our state, there have been a lot of mandates that are being thrown out, mostly by corporations and hospitals and the like. There are students that are enrolled as nursing students who, when they graduate, will have to make those choices. But right now, they're being asked by their schools to be vaccinated. And when they say no, then they say that they're violating their contract with the school in some form or fashion. If you're 60% into your class, then you don't get a refund. And, if waiting for all of these things to shake down. So there's a lot of students that are actually quitting college. We had a statewide rally at our Capitol building on Sunday, which garnered about 300 people, which is better than the weekly things at the local hospitals, but it still falls so short. And I struggle with who can do what against whom.
It will always come down to the public-private divide. Public schools, public hospitals, what they're doing is criminal, right? That's where you take knowing your rights and you walk in and say, wait a second, you are depriving me of my liberty and my property without due process of law. That is a federal crime. And you have to call, these students should be calling the FBI and filing complaints. They should be telling the administration, the staff, here you go, 5th Amendment, 14th Amendment, you're violating my rights. You're a publicly funded school. That means this is public school, public hospital. That means this is public property. Therefore, it is a crime. You are depriving me under color of some law or rule or regulation of a right protected by the Constitution of the United States. Private businesses, private schools, private hospitals, they have every right to control their own property. That is private property, not public property. The problem we have is what pain are they suffering for depriving people of their rights? See, they're still depriving people of their rights. They just have it's a question of as a private entity, they have private property rights, meaning it's actually legal for them to do it. As opposed to public property, that where it's not. What pain are they suffering? For the most part, most people I know are either putting on the mask or getting the vaccine, or they're peacefully walking away. They're not making a stink. They're not out there in front of, on the public sidewalk in front of the school, in front of the hospital saying, the school is depriving you of your rights. They're depriving me of my rights. These are tyrants. These are petty. They aren't, there's no, as long as there's no cost to these public entities, to these private entities, to either entity, why would they stop? Right? If you could break the law and you knew you were going to get away with it, how many people do you know would break the law simply because they knew they were going to get away with it? It's a standard moral question you see in a lot of philosophy classes, right? Would you commit murder if you knew you would get away with it? Well, as long as they're getting away with it, why should they stop? Right? It's the same reason why they don't protect your privacy, your personal information. There's no pain. There's no downside for them to do that. What we need to do is we need to create a downside, which is why I say, for the hospitals, colleges, universities, that it's harder, but I think those places that will protect your rights need to advertise it loudly and broadly. Hey, we respect your rights. We are not going to require a mask. We're not going to require a vaccine. We understand. We will protect your rights, so that people can see a distinction. Right now, all that happens is, oh well. So there's no pain. We have to induce pain, by refusing to do business with them. And by the way, if I were a student that they threatened not to give me a refund, I'd find a really good lawyer, a nice slip and fall lawyer, because they are breaking the contract. They have changed the terms of the contract without agreement of both parties.
Thank you.
Demanding a vaccine, they've modified the contract without the consent of all parties involved. They are the ones violating the contract, and yeah, they should sue the pants off of them. Find a lawyer that'll do it on contingency and just sue the pants off them. Make them pay for being petty tyrants.
So the hospitals are staffed at this point, but there are entire departments that are saying that when the deadlines come and if they're still saying that they have to get it in order to keep their job, they're ready to walk. So these very large medical centers all of a sudden are not going to have the required staff to even be accredited. And I really, there's so many different parties that can be injured with all of this that, I mean, it almost boggles the mind. It's not just the powers that be at these hospitals. It's the staff, it's the lack of patient care, it's all of the government mandates that are going to come because they're going to say that the hospitals are overrun with patients when they really aren't. They're just short-staffed. And it should encourage everyone to be out on the front lines, standing up with these people or for them. And I just cannot understand the apathy. For those that did stand up, held signs, had the American flag, I would say that it was a 50-50 split between people honking their horns to say thank you in support and the other ones flipping us off and telling us to go to the F home and get our shots. So where this comes from,
yeah.
I just...
The problem we're dealing with is not governmental, it's societal. And the one thing I'd bring up is, think of it as a strike, right? If you've got a labor union and the company you're working for is not treating their employees or their students properly, what happens? They're out in front. They got a picket line. They got signs. Yeah, there are people that are spitting on them. They don't care. We're letting you know what is going on. But the other thing I'd ask them to consider, rather than walking out, make them fire them.
They can't. We're a right to work state.
If they can't fire you, how do they stop you?
Well, they don't stop them from walking out, and that's why they have to do that. They have to not show up.
My point is, if they're saying you can't work here, you can't go to school here unless you get a vaccine. Make me. Keep showing. If you're saying they don't have the right to fire them, keep doing your job.
They changed the company policy that said that if you don't have a vaccine by a certain date, you are put on an automatic leave with no pay. And if you haven't complied by the second and last date, you are considered voluntarily resigned. That's how they get away from not paying unemployment. No. People all lose.
No. I didn't voluntarily resign. No. They need a lawyer. I did not volunteer. They didn't volunteer anything. Right. They're saying by not complying with the company policy, that's what they consider it. Well, again, are we dealing with private company or are we dealing with public entities?
Well, I don't know what you consider a hospital these days,
but depends.
They're for profit.
Is it privately funded? Is it publicly funded? It's in their financial statements. If they are publicly funded, you've got a criminal complaint. If it's private, then no, I did not voluntarily separate. You changed my employment contract and I did not agree to it. And that is the grievance that needs to be brought to court. How do you change the rules of employment, and therefore I did not voluntarily terminate. You made up new grounds to terminate me that we did not agree to initially. And we need to stop sitting back and let the people who are out to destroy our dictate the terms. No, you send me this. If I were there, it's like I am not. My first thing is I would send a cease and desist letter saying, "Excuse me, you changed the rules of the employment contract. You did not get my approval first. Therefore, this is not a voluntary separation. This is a violation of employment contract." Right?
Makes sense.
Yeah. And stop playing defense and start playing offense. Go for it. You've now, and make them spend the money to separate you. Send them bills. Send them bills for your salary. Wait a second. You did not. Where's my termination package? You changed the rules on me. Where's my termination package? Where you're required to find the state laws and push. We need to stop being passive. We need to defend our rights.
Well, they are. I do not consider them completely passive. They have reached out for attorneys. We cannot find one anywhere in our state that will go up against these very large hospital chains.
So attorneys help. Guess what? They can go online, search online for a cease and desist letter. They'll find a form letter. They can fill in the information and understand the company has changed the contract. You've changed the rules for employment. You did not get my consent. Therefore, this is not a voluntary separation. You are to cease and desist from all activities that refer to this as a voluntary separation. This is a termination because you have changed the employment guidelines, and you have initiated the change of the guidelines. I did not. Tunlord, you said you had a question before we run off here.
Okay, yeah. So I was thinking to myself, we can run in support for these health workers or whatnot by perhaps finding some recon or doing some recon about whoever's behind this mandate in that hospital. Because I know in the hospital in my county, it's the administration that's doing that. And I'm almost going as far as thinking, well, what do we protest at their house at night? And they don't get any sleep. And then it came to my mind, well, is that a peaceful protest? I guess.
I don't like the idea of going to people's houses because let's face it, You don't want people showing up at your house because they disagree with you. I don't go that far, but I would certainly point, you need to point out that these administrations are cowards. They're being dictated to by either government entities or corporate entities to not for the health of their students, not for the health of their patients, not for the health of their employees, but to cover their butts. These are cowards taking the coward's way out. And since the people, do little, if you walk away, there's no cost to them. You put up a stink, there's a cost to them. There's a cost in legal costs. There's a cost in reputation. We need to stop looking for someone else to protect our rights. We need to learn to stand up and protect our own. If you can't find a lawyer, go online to one of the online services and search for a cease and desist letter. And, oh, wait a second, you changed the rules. I didn't change the rules. Therefore, you are hereby demanding that you cease and desist, referring to this as a voluntary separation, that you treat this as a termination for cause, and that you prove the cause for which you are terminating me. Don't let them get away with setting the battlefield. Fight them on it. So.
Yeah, you make them fight in your field, not you fight in theirs.
Yeah, well, regardless, yes, you want them on your standpoint. You're still fighting on their terms, but you're actually fighting them. You're not simply walking away as soon as they push. So, okay, everyone, listen. We threw in the questions late. It's about 8:36. So I'm going to close this out. A couple more weeks. We'll have another Q&A. Bring your friends, bring your questions, and we'll see you then. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.